You have 15 million people in
and
other things. You're right.
You got.
Please feel free to bask in my glow.
President Trump is back in the UK, talking about Scotland, talking about the border, talking about his plans for presidency. But what is he really thinking? Well, that's what this video is all about. Stick around to the end, it gets really juicy. Welcome back to Beyond Words. This is not a political video. I'm not interested in whether or not you're pro or anti-Donald Trump. We're just going to be talking about what we see in this interview. So the first thing that I want to talk about is actually the handshake that happens right at the start, actually before the interview takes place. As with a lot of things in body language, the handshake is a lot more subtle than it might at first appear.
How was the golf?
The golf was great. It's great.
It's
Nice to see
fantastic.
you.
Everything about it's beautiful.
Great to have you here.
Yeah, good, lovely people.
Oh boy, did you see the wedding?
I know.
How
I know.
beautiful
I
is
know.
that?
I was chatting with them last night. Yeah, very nice people.
What I think is so interesting is that Trump kind of leads in with this palm up, which is a slightly less dominating way of doing a handshake. And we know that he's been coached in how to give handshakes, and he has used palm down handshake before, so we know he knows how to give a handshake and how to send signals with a handshake. So Trump leads in with this palm up, but the actual shake itself, his hand is more neutral, which I think is interesting. He's presenting a slightly more submissive side, but the actual movement, he corrects that. Second interesting thing is that there's no palm contact in this handshake. If you slow it down, you'll see that Trump actually grabs Farage's fingers. And when he does so, he actually breaks eye contact and looks off in the direction of where I think the production crew is. So this lack of eye contact is a little bit odd. It makes me think that he is playing a power game with this. He is saying, I'm the big dog here, I'm the important one, and I'm going to allow you to look at me whilst I look over here at some other people and make sure that they know out of the two of us which one is the alpha dog. So he grabs the fingers and then pulls them into this belly area, to what Mark Bowden would call the truth plane kind of area, which is good. I think that sends the right kind of message, but it's a bit of a duality. We get this slightly limper grip on the fingers, bit of an aggressive style pull, but it is to a vulnerable area on the body. So I'm in two minds about this handshake. On the one side, you do have the limper grip and the more aggressive pull. On the other, you have the submissive entry and pulling into this vulnerable area. So let me know what you think Trump is trying to do with this handshake.
But there's a lot of Scott in Donald Trump, isn't there?
Well, my mother loved this country, and she would come back every year during the summer, usually with one of my sisters. And she just loved Scotland, and she respected the Queen greatly, loved and respected the Queen. And so we've had a tremendous relationship to Scotland.
So the first question here, I think, is a really good opportunity to get a baseline for Trump in this interview. It's not a particularly combative interview because they are essentially friends, Trump and Nigel Farage. And this first question is a bit of a lead-in, it's just setting the tone. So there's no reason why Trump should be stressed or uncomfortable. So I think we can use this as a good baselining opportunity. When I say baseline, what I mean is this. How does Trump behave normally? How does he behave when he's not under stress? And then we will compare that to later on when we see other behaviors that crop up to see if they are part of that baseline, if they're just normal for this situation, or if they might be signs of stress or even signs of deception. So the first thing, looking at Trump's body position, is his hands are steepled. They are steepled down, but the thumbs are kind of up, or at best flat. They're not collapsed in, which would show a lack of confidence. There's a nice rule of thumb you can use when looking at seated individuals, that the more comfortable somebody is, the harder it will be for them to get up and leave. And if you look at Trump's position, he is sat quite on the edge of his seat, his feet are flat underneath him, and it does look like he could get up and leave quite easily. So does that mean that he is uncomfortable? I'm not sure about that. I think it's actually because the chair is uncomfortable for him. He's quite a big guy, looks like quite a small chair. I don't think it's the kind of chair that you sit back and relax in. So I think that's probably what is going on there. It's not that he's uncomfortable because of the interview, he's uncomfortable because the chair is rubbish. As he goes through the answer, his hands do not really move at all. He does not illustrate with his hands. He does illustrate with his eyebrows and with his chin. He kind of moves his chin around. That's something that he's done in every interview I've ever seen of him. And we're getting a pretty solid indication that his eye home, or where his eyes usually go to recall information or when he's thinking about something, is to his 3 o'clock, to his right, or our 9 o'clock as we're looking at him. There is also a lot of eye movement down to sort of 7 or 8 o'clock, which is somewhere that we tend to associate with emotional accessing, although I do think that there's something else going on here, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. His blink rate is really interesting as well. To me, blink rate is usually something I look for stress. In this case, I think it's an indication of what's called cognitive load, or how much thinking somebody is doing. And I think that's what's going on here, because every time that he has a little spike in blink rate, it's sort of at the end of one thought and just going into the start of the next. In that transition period, we get a lot of blinks. So I think it's an indicator of how much cognitive work he's having to do. We also see him do some nice shrugs. In the body language YouTube space, there's two big ideas about shrugging. Over on the behavioral arts, Spidey goes into a lot of detail about shrugs and how they communicate a lack of something, lack of information, lack of caring. And in the behavior panel, Chase Hughes says that there's always an element of an apology in a shrug. And you can sort of see how those two things marry up together, like, sorry, I just can't tell you anymore. Things like that. And that seems consistent with the shrug that we see in this question. It's a sort of shrug saying, there's nothing more I can tell you. Trump uses that shrug a lot in this interview, and sometimes I think it makes sense, and sometimes I think it is misplaced. So we'll have to go into each one of those as we go through. Okay, so this is the first clip that we're going to take a look at.
Well,
This is the pitch to
that's
America.
part of it. The economy was great, and we're going to have a strong border. Our border is pathetic. We will have, at the end of this year, 15 million people, in my opinion, come into the country. 15 million. That's bigger than New York State. They come from mental institutions. They come from prisons, jails. They come from everywhere. We have no idea.
And some seeking a better life.
Sure, some seeking a better life, but how many? Look, if you look at the prisons, if you look at mental institutions all over the world, they're being emptied out into our country because we have an incompetent president. That man is incompetent. And
so this is a really interesting one. If you go and look at the interview, it's at 26:46. Right when he's saying 15 million, we get a massive emotional display. This is really the only emotional display that we see in the whole interview. I think there's anger in the eyebrows and the eyes, and disgust in the mouth and nose. His brows come down, his eyes narrow, which is anger, and then in his mouth we get this wrinkling of the nose, the corners of the mouth are pulled down a little bit, and that's disgust. And at no other point in the interview do we see anything close to this level of emotion. So I think this is his genuine emotional, visceral reaction to what he thinks is going on. As he goes on, the anger, I think, stays in the eyebrows. There's still a little bit of something going on here that could be the disgust lingering, but it seems like the disgust kind of dissipates. But it does seem like he's angry about this, because when Farage kind of counters with, well, some people are just looking for a better life, we get a big head movement. He kind of dodges that, and then he kind of bobs and weaves like he's in a boxing ring, and he just doesn't admit that that might be what's happening. I do think that he's doing something that we call arguing from ignorance, when he's talking about where they're coming from, mental institutions, from prisons, and we don't know where. Well, if you don't know, then that kind of invalidates the first 2 points on your list, doesn't it? Because you don't know. And the 50 million is 50 million in my opinion. So again, there's no actual factual knowledge. He doesn't care about the facts, doesn't care about the numbers. This is about an emotional reaction for him. And therefore, I think it's genuine.
But you know, I look at your life. You've got the best portfolio of golf courses anyone's ever owned.
and other things, you're right.
You've got a lovely wife, great kids, great relationship, wonderful life. You've been successful. You've got enough money to enjoy yourself and do what you want. And you're going to give it all up again to run for president.
Well, we have an interesting situation. Our country was doing fantastically well. We got hit with the gift from China, the China virus or COVID, whatever you want to call it. We rebuilt it back again. Our stock market was actually higher when I left than it was just pre-COVID coming in, which is incredible.
So you see Farage kind of psyching himself up, bouncing his feet a little bit, and then one of the only times that Trump doesn't attend to Farage, he turns away. Now, what is going on here? I think it's this. I think he is essentially giving him permission. Trump is giving Farage permission to look at him, to bask in him, in his magnificence of having this great portfolio.
Please feel free to bask in my glow.
Definitely a squirrel.
Yep, squirrel.
And it's very similar to what he did in the handshake, this turning away, breaking eye contact, and checking that everybody else is on the same page. Like, yeah, I've got the best portfolio of other things as well. Then when Farage is talking, we get this big sniff. It doesn't seem to be from Farage, so I would say it's from Trump. And one of the things that we've seen, for example, in his debates and in his deposition, I think it was as well, he sniffs like that when he thinks he's won something. He's scored a point. So for him, this is an important point that he's won over, he's gained in this interview. Like, yeah, people are admitting that I'm the big dog, I've got the best portfolio. When he talks about the coronavirus or the China virus, right after he says that, I think we see a tongue jump. I think his tongue comes out past his teeth. He could be wetting his lips. It would be something that we usually associate with stress and fight or flight. I usually think of two things when looking at a tongue jab. First is that it's a distaste or displeasure, it's repelling something. It doesn't seem obviously applicable here. And the second is that he thinks he's getting away with something. I think he knows that calling it the China virus is a bit controversial. He got in a bit of trouble for doing that at the time. And so he feels like he's cheated the system. He's got away with calling it that in this interview. So we get that tongue jab. And now that he's back to talking about how great his administration was and how great the finances were and the stock market, which is really his area of expertise, he's the most animated we've seen him in this interview. It kind of comes up, he gets more energy, his hands are doing more. Compare the use of his hands now to the first couple of questions that we looked at, where they're locked down here, not moving at all. Now they're moving around quite freely. All at this height, kind of belly height, which is interesting, shows some training there, but he essentially either narrows the focus into something specific or broadens the topic out immensely, and he bounces between these 2 points.
And the question Starmer doesn't want to sort of answer in any way at all is a trans woman a woman?
So, look, when I see men participating in women's sports, when I see records being broken, like you say, the big event with the cyclist, and pretty easy victory from what I understand, I think it's very unfair. I think it's very disrespectful, actually, to women. I talk about it all the time. I don't do it for applause, but I will say one of the biggest hands I get is when I say we will not allow men to compete in women's sports. Weightlifting, swimming, running. It's so unfair. I think it's totally disrespectful. And the records are being broken, like sometimes by a lot. And I think it's a very bad thing.
So right away, we get a big pause between the end of the question and the start of Trump's answer. That pause is not typical for him in this interview. We also get a vocal click, and we get a big intake of breath as he's feeding more oxygen into the body to prepare for this. He kind of rocks away, which is a distancing behavior. So he's distancing by not answering, he's distancing with his body, he's preparing his brain and body for some kind of confrontation, perhaps by getting more oxygen in. He qualifies the answer. This look.
So, look, when I see...
I think all of this is buying time to figure out how to phrase his answer or to come up with an answer that he thinks will play the best. We know his cognitive load is up because his blink rate is up. There's no real reason he should feel stressed about giving his honest opinion here. So I do think it's cognitive load. There's a big emphasis on men. We get an eyebrow flash, where the eyebrows come up, which is consistent with his baseline. We get this tilt of the head, kind of snappy tilt. He does this a few times. It's always for emphasis. It's not a head tilt in the sense that I'm trying to communicate with you. It is, this is the important point. And the word men is overpronounced.
Men.
There's more force, there's more articulation. It is clear that that is the point he's driving. Men. Then I think something occurs to him, because we see his eyes dart over to the other side than his usual eye home, somewhere around 2 o'clock, and we get this brilliant line, I don't do it for the applause. And I think most of us would understand that what he's really saying there is, give me some applause. And then, just in case you missed it, he goes on to talk about all the applause that he has got for it, just to help us out. But he quickly realizes he doesn't have that much more to say. So we get this brief recapitulation of it being a bad thing. The volume starts to drop off what Scott Rouse would call fading fact. That means that there's a lack of confidence in what he's saying as it gets quieter and quieter towards the end, and the speed is increased. So he's rushing through to get to the end of the sentence. So I do think this is his genuine opinion. I don't see anything that would suggest deception, just that he's had this cool idea about getting some applause for this, and then he runs out of something to say, so it kind of just speeds up and gets quieter like I'm doing now.
When you come here, I mean, this golf course, you've turned this golf course around. It's now the #1 course in the whole of Britain and Europe.
Yeah.
Got this magnificent hotel. You must have missed this place. You haven't been for a couple of years.
Well,
5
I've been
years
so
now.
busy politically that I haven't. It's been a few years, and we spent a tremendous amount of money. It was done with a great architect, great golf architect, recommended by Peter Dawson of the Royal NH. I said, give me the best one, and Martin Hawtrey, and he's a fabulous guy, a fabulous man. And he did, what he does is this type of course, and he really did a great job. And, you know, we had a lot to do with it also. We have very strong ideas. I have very powerful ideas on golf and what it should be.
Well, I hear that.
So this question is centered around Trump not having been back because of his political activities in America. And when the topic of politics comes up, we see him sort of screw his feet into the floor. He's getting himself planted and balanced, ready for the question and ready to give his answer. To me, the most interesting things in this answer are about the shoulders. When he's saying that they've done a lot of work, it's hard to say if it's a single shrug or if it's a mistimed shrug, because it looks like both shoulders move, but not at the same time. And I think given that we know from his baseline that he does use both shoulders to shrug, the fact that they're mistimed like that, it just makes me think that there's something going on in his head causing that sort of delay, that mismatch. We also get a shrug on, I have powerful ideas about golf. There's a bit of hesitation before the word powerful, and powerful is an odd word to me in this context. I think the more natural word would be good ideas or strong ideas. Powerful just seems like an odd choice. So what's going on here? Well, I think the shrugging is a sort of lack of confidence or a lack of ability to explain how his ideas are so powerful, or maybe that he hasn't done so much with the design of the golf course as he might lead us to believe. And I think the choice of word powerful is actually a raise in status. It's not just that his ideas are good or correct, it's that they're actually higher than ideas that I might have, or you might have. Ideas are on a different level, they're powerful. So this next clip is immediately after this last clip.
But yesterday you were out thinking how the course could be improved even further.
Yeah, well, we're going to make a couple of little minor adjustments, but it's fantastic. Everybody wants to see the Open Championship here. The players, it's their favorite course. It's the #1 rated in Europe. In some lists, it's the #1 rated anywhere in the world. And they want to have the Open Championship back here. I would have thought that Sturgeon would have wanted that and pressed it, but she's got her own agenda.
She's gone. She's gone.
She's gone.
Are you pleased to see the back of her?
Well, I must tell you, we had I didn't know her. I don't know if I ever met her. I'm not sure that I ever met her. I dealt with Alex Salmond. I got along great with him, actually, until the windmills started coming all over Scotland. I said, you're hurting Scotland. You're destroying your environment, frankly. The windmills are, I think, a great disturbance to this country and to a lot of other countries. Very expensive energy. But I had a very good relationship with him early on. When I was getting my approvals, I got all the approvals for Aberdeen, which is incredible. And we built an incredible place in Aberdeen also, and spent a lot of time on Turnberry, and Turnberry has been a tremendous success.
We see a little bit more feet action to start with. We get a shrug on favourite course, and it might be tempting to say that he doesn't believe that the professional golfers do have this as their favourite course. That's not what I think is going on here. Instead, I think this is there's nothing more I can say, it's their favourite course, what can I say? So I think he's actually using these shrugs to raise his status in that kind of situation. He's saying, look, it's just the favourite course, I'm just making the best golf courses in the world, that's it. We get a lot more shrugs moving forward, so let's keep that in the back of our mind and test that hypothesis as we go on. Then he goes on to bring up Nicola Sturgeon, the ex-First Minister of Scotland. I don't think that he knew that she wasn't in office anymore, and I'll tell you why. As soon as Farage says that she's not here anymore, we get an immediate repetition. We then get a very, very quick lip compression, and after he sort of said, yeah, that she's gone, there's a head tilt and a locking of eyes, or a reduction in blink rate. And that's focus. And the head tilt is social communication. It's saying, I'm going to take information from you. So he's in data intake. So I think what's happened is he's recognized that he's made a mistake. He doesn't have all the information that he needs, and he's now soaking that information up to try and get back on top. There's a loss of fluency. He has trouble forming that next sentence.
Well, I must tell you, we had
We get finally some illustration with his hands, but it's all down below his waist in what Mark Bowden would call a grotesque plane. And we see later on that he does start to gesture in the same kind of way, but it's at belly height, it's up in the truth plane. And we get a vocal click as well. These are all signs of stress. He knows that he's made a small mistake, and then he launches into a bunch of other stuff that has nothing to do with the question about Aberdeen and windmills. And he's just throwing things out to try and move the topic of conversation away from that mistake. So I think he knows he's made a small blunder. So there we go. If you want to see more content, more Donald Trump content, let me know. More content in general, do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.